Okay, it looks like we are there or close to it. So we will kick this off. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Quasar webinar. So glad to see everybody. We're excited to connect with you in the absence of NAB and walk you through a full demo of Quasar. I'm Angie Robertson, and I'm joined today with Cam Eicher and Kirk Harnack, and they will be they're joining me today. They're here with us today, and they'll be walking you through Quasar. So before we get started, Kirk, next slide. There we go. Do you notice anything different about Telos Alliance? We have a new look and logo, and you're one of the first to be formally introduced to it. We've dropped the word "the" from our name, making it less of a mouthful, and we've also added a new, cool, and modern logo to accompany the name. So in addition to the logo and the name, you've noticed a new tagline. Love what you hear, because, well, frankly, we think you're going to. And we wanted to convey this love and passion of really good audio across all of our brands. So before we get started, Kurt, can we go to the next slide, and I'll go over a couple of items for this webinar specifically. If you look at the bottom of your screen, you should have a Q&A button. And here's where you can submit questions. So we'll do our best to answer those throughout the webinar. If we don't get to any of them, you can either submit those questions after the webinar to quasar@telosalliance.com, or we will monitor those questions and reach back out to you post-webinar. Also, after the webinar, the email address I just mentioned, the quasar@telosalliance.com. If you have any questions, feedback about the webinar, need more information, just want to say hi, get a demo, send us a note there, and then our team will get back to you ASAP. So without further ado, Kirk, it's yours.
And we stop sharing slides, and we bring in Cam Eicher and myself. So we're glad that you're here and glad you could join us. Cam, we're going to buzz through a lot of information pretty quickly about the Quasar. You want to tee this off just a little bit for us and tell us what we can expect over the next hour?
Yeah, we're going to do a pretty good flyover of the console and try to get into a live demo of the actual surface and the UI, see if we can answer a few questions and talk about the workflow and the positioning that goes along with the Quasar. So it's a lot to get into. We'll do the best we can to get through everything in the hour, answer a few questions, and tell a couple stories while we're at it, I'm sure.
All righty then. Well, let's move on. And we're going to cover first just a couple of, kind of get you to where we are now. Look at console evolution. Now, for those of you who are old or been around a while like me, maybe you remember in 2003 when actually under the name Telos, we didn't even have the Axia name yet, the name Telos, we introduced the first audio over IP console meant for broadcast, and that was the Telos Smart Surface. And you see it in the upper left corner of the screen there. Some of you have these. There are still dozens of these in operation. And we wanted something that was dramatic looking and yet effective and easy to use. I absolutely love this console, and I know that people who have been using it do as well. It had 2 color screens on it. It had you could have as many faders as you wanted as long as it was 16, because that's how many came with it. 8 on the left, 8 on the right. Of all things, it did come with a spinning ashtray right here up in the front center. And when they outlawed smoking in control rooms, we got rid of the ashtray. How about that? Just a couple of years later, though, we realized that people wanted modular consoles. Some people had needed a big console or a small console. And so we came along with the Element line of consoles. These consoles, there are literally thousands of these on the air at radio and a few television stations and theaters and hey, even in some secret locations that you have to have, let's say, top-level security clearance to go to. The Element series, very modular, had modules for telephone control and production control, buttons for intercom eventually came along, all kinds of customizable buttons, and a monitor module all came along. And you could also split this console up into several frames. I've seen as many as 4 frames being used, but a split frame with 2 console surfaces became pretty popular. And so the Element went through a number of software improvements over the years, and also a couple of different mix engines that went with it. But today we're really looking at surface design. Not long after the Element came along, we came along with a smaller series of consoles, the IQ And then we followed that up with the radius and the rack, which is the RAQ, which is the rack mount one, and also the desk, which is not shown. It's a very small console that fits easily on a desktop in almost any situation. And then people said, you know what, we want even more. We want some different styling and a place to move on from here. So, Cam, why don't you tell us about the next console that we came out with?
Yeah, from the Element, we came out with the Fusion, and the Fusion is working on year number 6 of shipping and getting installed in radio stations around the globe. It's got a revamped design, a lot of the same functionality and features that the Element had, of course, but then as Kirk said, users needed more. So more functionality, more functionality in the display, and more options for the users at hand. And again, the same basic audio infrastructure, all running on Livewire, lived underneath the console. So customers that had invested in Element consoles long ago could easily upgrade into Fusion using all the same audio infrastructure they had and just revamping the work surface. Unfortunately, for some customers, Fusion wasn't even enough. So as we went through the last couple years, we had customers coming to us saying, it would really be great if you could add in additional functionality, additional output capacity, some improved audio processing. Things like auto mix have become a big thing in recent years. And so we went to the drawing board, we got to work, and we being the really smart people in the company, not us, but we came out with Quasar. Introduced at last IBC, it quickly won Best of Show awards and captured the attention of everybody walking down the IBC aisles. It is really a striking product, and it really brings out the best of what Telos can bring to an audio over IP universe.
Let's take a look at it then. This is the Quasar. It's the new modular 6th generation mixing console from Axia. As you probably know by now, Axia was the inventor of audio over IP usable for broadcast. There was already AoIP before Axia came along, but it really wasn't usable in the broadcast environment. There's now over 10,000 AoIP consoles and over 100,000 connected devices that are on the air worldwide. In fact, at any given moment, we figure there is probably close to 1 million streams of Livewire, and now that's being added with AES67 going on at any given moment around the world. Cam?
It's really phenomenal when you look at how much Livewire has taken over the broadcast world. You sit back and just contemplate those numbers for a minute, and it really is just striking how prevalent audio over IP has become, and it's really the normal now. You wouldn't really build a studio on anything else. We're seeing this in not only radio stations, but also television stations, and Quasar can fit for some really nice television installations thanks to its motorized fader control, its modular design, and a lot of the extra features that we've crammed in here that you're going to learn about throughout the course of this webinar. We've got fanless power supplies built into the back. There's several levels of redundancy for those supplies. You can have up to 4 levels of power supply redundancy. And we've also shrunk the fader pitch, which allows you to get more faders per inch than a typical radio broadcast console.
You'll notice one big difference from the Quasar console from the other big consoles we've made, and that's there's no overbridge now. All the displays that you're ever going to need for the console are right in the Quasar surface. Single or split frame configurations either way, tabletop or flush mount, and the tabletop frames are convertible into flush mount if that's what you'd like to do. Cam, talk about this interesting concept here of the color and finishes of Quasar fit with TV lighting. What does that mean?
Well, we really looked at where these consoles need to go in the broadcast facility and how consoles are typically not the focal point of a radio studio or even a television studio anymore. They need to be there because they've got functionality that is required, but you don't want it to be the central point and being this big glaring blemish on your countertop. So as we looked at all of these cameras that are going into television areas, into radio studios for web streaming and live streaming, we wanted the Quasar to blend in with the decor, and we wanted the actual controls to pop out. So when you look at the Quasar, what you need to see pops out right at you. Everything else blends into the background, which makes for a fabulous look, and it's really unobtrusive when it goes into with the design of your studio. So we think it's a winner. We think it's a great choice. And when you look at a shot like you see on the screen now, you can see that all the controls that you need to see are popping right out at you, whereas everything else just blends away and doesn't confuse the operator and doesn't get in the way of your workflow in your program. Further to that, we've taken it a step further where you're seeing a single console here, but those modules can actually be installed standalone without a frame. So if you needed to take a 4-fader module and put it in a different location, it simply connects back to your infrastructure via an Ethernet connection and a power cord, and you're off to the races. You don't actually require the big frame to install all these consoles. So it really gives you the ability to be creative with your install and creative with your workspace and make the installation work for you and your talent.
One thing that's a little bit difficult to show in a flat picture like this in a webinar is differentiating between what are real controls that you grab and what are touch-sensitive controls and touch screen controls. Yes, there's 3 different kinds of controls on this console, but they all feel very, very intuitive. So we'll get to talking about that. A lot of design has been put into thinking about what we do with a console and what do we want to happen. It's just a quick reminder of what's this going to do, or just want to make sure that when I push this button, the right thing is going to happen. We've put a lot of work into making that happen and making it very intuitive. But we're going to show you what some of those things are as we take you on through a tour and we open the hood and look inside. I want to remind you that it is an easy-to-operate touchscreen-based UI in the middle there, and that's where an enormous amount of functionality is stored. There's no external display required, although you can hook one up. And not only can you hook up an external display, there's an intuitive web UI with integrated HTML5 remote control. Cam, I wonder if you can expound on that just a little bit.
Well, yeah, and it's interesting that with COVID and everybody focused on remote broadcasts and how do you do work away from a studio and work away from your console, how important something like an HTML5 interface has come to be these days. So that center display can actually be replicated on any HTML5 device. And when we say replicated, it's not a mirror where you're just seeing a copy of that display. It's actually an independent functioning HTML5 display that you can call up on anything with a web browser so that you can have parallel control of your console from multiple locations, either within the studio or through a VPN or some sort of security tunnel from outside as well. So some great advancements in being able to control the console and have multiple people in multiple locations all working and collaborating together. And that's really through the magic of everything being Ethernet connected, everything being accessible via its own IP address, and having this fully integrated live wire and audio over IP controlled system. It's really fantastic. One other nice thing about Quasar is that all the buttons that you see, these physical buttons that Kirk was talking about a minute ago on the fader strip, all of those are user assignable. So we had found in some of our previous consoles that the workflow that we envisioned didn't fit every single user. So we give the users now the ability to reprogram those buttons via a very simple drop-down menu. If there's a functionality that you need or a functionality that you don't need, you can quickly reassign the functionality of those buttons just from pointing and clicking. So if you'd rather have an on-off toggle button instead of individual on-off buttons, it's easy to make those changes on the fly.
This picture actually does a pretty good job or attempts to show you what buttons are real, things you're going to be touching and quickly moving about and assigning quickly or deassigning. But I like to experience when I push these buttons, you get confirmation of what you've done, either through, of course, the button light or perhaps a change on the master module in the center. There's just good, easy touch and confirmation as to what you're doing there. Cam, this console, now we've been showing pictures of this with 16 faders, that is four fader modules. And what we're finding is that a lot of people have asked us about layering this console. So you could have 16 faders, but really you could have quite a few more active faders that you're just not touching right now. Would you tell us a bit about that concept?
Yeah, many customers on here will already be aware of how layers work. You're familiar with it in a lot of television broadcast consoles or consoles that are designed more for the pro sound industry. So
Mm.
layers essentially are, if you think of consoles, faders that are stacked on top of each other, and you're turning pages in a book. So your first page has got 16 faders, and when you turn that page, those first 16 faders are still doing their job. You just now have the ability to look at 16 additional faders. So we have 4 layers, and you can switch very quickly between any of those 4 layers. The faders here are motorized, so they'll snap to position of those layers. And really for an 8 fader console, 8 physical fader console, you have the ability to really control 32 faders. For some customers, that may not work with your workflow, may not work with the skill level of your users. It may be too intimidating, so you can switch all the layering off and just use it as a traditional console. But for others, once they realize the power that could be hidden underneath this functionality, it really becomes something interesting, and again, leads you to rethinking how you might design your studios and how you might build your workflow with your talent.
The encoders and the faders themselves are touch sensitive. Now, for those of us, for those people who haven't experienced it, I've got to experience it. I'm kind of floored by what this does. It almost seems like, whoa, the console knows what I want to do next. Or it's going to let me not make a mistake because it's going to show what happens when I push this button or move this control. Can you tell us a bit more about the practicalities of touch-sensitive encoders and faders?
Well, the touch-sensitive encoders and faders, for some of it, it's a very practical idea. So faders have to be touch-sensitive when they're motorized. That way, if you have an automation system that is trying to control those fader levels, the automation system will realize, or the Quasar will realize, when you actually have your finger on a fader, and you will override the automation system trying to change that fader, so you don't have grinding gears or problems or conflicts in control. For other things, it's designed to add to the elegance of the console. And one of our hallmarks at Axia and Telos since the beginning has been, how do you make a very, very powerful and a very, very complex thing simple? I usually refer to it as, hey, any engineer can sit together and put together a console that has 10,000 buttons that do 10,000 things. There's no magic in that. There's no challenge in that. The thing is, can you figure out how to do 10,000 things with only 50 controls and make it intuitive and make it easy? And that's where some of these touch-sensitive controls come in. It hides the functionality, it hides the advanced features until you think you might need them. And then when you touch a control, it brings up the information that you need right at that time. So that information is not cluttering up the screen when you don't need it, but it's right there just a finger away when you have to have it.
I think you get to demonstrate this a little bit later on. You're going to demonstrate that live, what happens when you would touch a touch-sensitive button, right?
You will get to see it. Not quite the same as doing it live on the webinar, but you guys will get an idea of how cool it would be in your studios for sure.
So one of the first things that I notice about this console, and this is something that as a disc jockey, a board operator, I never had, and that is bar graph meters next to each fader. Now people, I guess, in the TV business have been used to this for years, or maybe in the live sound business. How is this helpful in the radio side of things?
Well, it's helpful in any side of things. It's a great confidence builder just to know that before you grab that fader, audio is there. If you're expecting audio to be there, or in some cases, you're expecting audio not to be there, and if you see audio is there, you don't grab the fader. So how many times have you had the wrong thing go on air because you thought it was channel A and you really grabbed the wrong one? So this is really about allowing people inside of a busy environment where they're focusing on lots of things to try to make their job easier. And this is one of the ways that we make their job easier, is by having all the important controls nice and big and right in front of them, so that the ability to see what you're doing and make less mistakes is right there.
You know, whenever a company introduces a new product, especially one that people will be touching a lot, companies tend to talk about durability and how rugged it's built with this quality component or that. And I got to tell you, I've never seen a company work so hard to make sure that every single component was well thought out and also was available. All the parts that are in the Quasar that are subject to wear, things that you push and push over and over and move up and down, they're all either industrial grade, automotive grade, or some of them even avionics grade. And by that, we know they're going to be available for a long time, and we know they're going to last a long time, and they're meant to be replaceable should they ever wear out. So there's a lot of work let me move that. There's a lot of work that's gone into making sure the things that you're going to touch are not going to break. And if you use this thing for 20 years and something does wear out, it's going to be replaceable. Let's take a bit more time to talk about the build and the design of the mechanics involved in this console. First of all, my goodness, it's a little heavy, isn't it, Cam?
Well, it's very well built, and there's certainly a heft to it. And I've realized that I need to start going to the gym more as I do my Quasar demos because, man, it's a lot of work lifting these things up and down and onto airline conveyor belts and things of that nature. So it is a solid console. It's very well built, and from the moment you lay eyes on it, you'll feel and know that it's made with quality and that this thing is going to be able to last in your studio for a long, long time. It's a pretty simple design, and it's pretty simple to put together to figure out the components that you're looking for. As you'll see from this shot here, there's two styles of modules. There's the main master module in the middle, and then we have the 4 fader modules on either side. And you can build consoles as large as you want. The real question is just ergonomics and what is the size of the frame that you're going to put those faders in. You can, again, mount these things in split frames and combo frames. You can mount them straight into the tabletop. So it's really just a question of how you connect everything together that makes a console.
And those modules are each, as you said earlier, they're each independent. They're powered and Ethernetted independently, which means the frame is really just I think you've said before, it's a parking lot. It's a parking place for the power supplies, for that module in the back that's in the middle that we'll talk about, and then for each of the modules themselves with the 4 fader or the master module. The frame itself doesn't have any smarts, and you can get them in a variety of sizes. You can even build a console and make it run beautifully without using the frame if you want to drop modules into your own woodwork or metalwork. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. So the idea is flexibility, and we'll take a look at the frame and the options. So there's several different sizes of frames, everything that holds just a master module with a single fader module, so essentially a 4 fader console, all the way up to what would hold 28 faders. So a quick look, if you back up one there, Kirk, we'll look at that fader module real quick. That's your typical fader module, and you can see that you've got a couple of encoders at the top, TFT high resolution color screens in the middle indicating some levels and some sources, the motorized faders with the bar graphs on the side along with some indicator lights as to what's happening on the faders, and real high quality on-off buttons with a button guard and a RGB LED strip indicating the type of source that's assigned to each of those buttons. We'll look at that a little bit more detail in just a second.
Yeah, Angie?
Cam, we have a question that you guys kind of touched on. If you take a single module and make it standalone, can it be powered with PoE, or does it require a separate power connection as well as the network connection? I thought I'd squeeze that in since we kind of touched on that.
Sure. These would actually require, it's a good question, they would require a power connection and an Ethernet connection. The current draw on this and the ability to run it on PoE is not something that we built into that module. So it does require, it's just a simple 12-volt power supply. So it's nothing fancy on the power supply, but it's not something that would go over PoE. And then you have a network connection. You could, in fact, the bottom of this module has 2 network jacks. So if you really wanted to be redundant, it's one of the things that customers were asking for is more redundancy in our flagship products. So you can actually run 2 Ethernet connections to this module, a main and a backup.
Cam, I believe you can also daisy chain the Ethernet connection from one to another, yeah?
And that would be the other functionality of that second one, is that if you wanted to save some space on your Ethernet switch, you can go from the switch and then daisy chain across all the modules and complete the circuit that way as well.
Gotcha. So that's the 4 fader module. That's an actual cutout of an actual photograph of the module, so you can get some relief. You can see what's real buttons and what's flat to the frame. I really like. Cam, you talked about the LEDs that are at the top of the bar graph meters, and I can see that there's a red LED indicating dynamics control if the dynamics are active. There's EQ. There's a green one for aux, and I can't quite read the blue one, but these give you some status as to how each channel is set up. So if you're wondering, hey, does this have processing on it? Oh yeah, the dynamics light is on, so it must.
Yeah, and we'll dig into all of that as we get into the live demo, the live on-screen demo. You'll see the functionality of those lights and of those buttons as well.
As long as we got this picture, this may be the biggest one we have, up there where it says mic 1, mic 2, mic 3, and mic 4, those TFT displays. I've seen some pictures where you can actually put a photograph. You can put an image on there. The ones that we have for our demo purposes are a little goofy. We've got some of the the engineers and people here at the Telos Alliance. Talk to me about how useful that is and how to change that picture. I guess when you change the source, the picture changes, yeah?
Well, exactly. And it's just one more way that we've tried to make this be as error-free and easy to drive as possible. So if you've got a big picture of your morning show host on top of the fader, they're going to be pretty sure which fader to grab to control their mic. So you can also dynamically change that again as you change the sources. Those pictures would change up there. It's just a JPEG or a PNG file that gets attached to the source profile that can be uploaded as part of the snapshot for the module.
Having pictures of your co-hosts on the fader strips, on the channel strips, sounds like a great opportunity for shenanigans, if you ask me.
Well, you know, broadcast would be nothing if it weren't for shenanigans.
That's right. Let's take a look at what we call the master module. Let's describe this.
Yeah, the master module has got a 12-inch touchscreen in the middle of it. Very nice, very high resolution, and very industrial. So we jokingly refer that this is the kind of touchscreen they use at the cash register at McDonald's. So if a bunch of 16-year-olds making French fries can operate this without it breaking or having any issues, we believe it's going to be the right caliber of what goes into a broadcast facility in a broadcast studio. And then you've got the physical controls that surround it. You've got some user programmable buttons down the right-hand side, along with the layer switch buttons. And then below that, we've got encoders that drive the functionality of the touchscreen, as well as your control room headphone and control room monitor controls down there at the very bottom. And again, we'll take a closer look at that in a couple minutes when we jump into the live screen for you.
I want to point out that in a little while, when Cam takes you on a real tour inside this thing, he's going to show what happens when you just simply lay your finger on. Don't push, but just lay your finger and touch any of those silvery looking buttons that from this angle they look silver down the right hand side of the master module, or when you lay your finger on any of the rotary encoders, that's when you get this touch sensitive pop-up display to inform you of what it does or what's going to be happening or the current state.
Perfect. So let's take a quick look at the back of the console. The back of the console is not so exciting, but everybody that is an engineer can't get by without looking at the back. So in this particular console, we have a pair of power supplies, and then we have the center module there, which is called the rear distribution board. And we'll take a quick zoom in on that and look at the power supply. The power supply is just a very robust switching load sharing power supply. That console can provide spaces, depending upon the size of the console, for up to 4 power supplies. So you can really have a high level of redundancy. Our biggest consoles, we recommend you run them on a minimum of 2 supplies, just because the current draw is enough that you don't want to be up in the 80–90% load range of a single power supply. So we do recommend that for the larger consoles, you power them with a minimum of 2 supplies. And in fact, when you order a frame, they come standard with those 2 supplies. And then power supply number 3 and 4 would be your redundant supplies. The center distribution board, in the middle of that, it shows you your power supply confidence LEDs, that if any of those power supplies have an issue, you'll get the alarm indication. Otherwise, you've got some green LEDs there that will show you the power supply is behaving normally. On the right-hand side is your Ethernet in and out that takes you an easy connection into the Ethernet architecture of those fader modules, along with an HDMI and USB jack that parallel that touchscreen. So if I were to plug a screen into that HDMI jack, I would actually get a display mirroring what's on the touchscreen display on the master module itself. So great for a backup, or even if you're a customer that prefers the meter bridge style of consoles like we have in Fusion, you can absolutely plug something like that in and have the same large display that you would have in a Fusion or an Element console available to you. And then over on the left-hand side, we've got two jacks. Those look like Ethernet jacks, but here those are Studio Hub audio jacks. We offer an optional headphone talkback module. This module is the width of a single fader, has an XLR connector at the top for a gooseneck mic, a headphone jack down at the bottom. Those will internally wire to these Studio Hub RJ45 connectors, providing you a microphone output and a headphone line input. Typically, you'll hook that up to a mixed signal X node, and you'll be able to have an operator talkback mic and a set of headphones easily accessible on the front of the console.
Nice. Nice.
Cam and Kirk, real quick, before we move on, we have a couple questions. Our friend Mark Farrington has asked a couple. I don't know if you guys can see your Q&A window. We have a couple come in. I've answered some of them privately, but these are still open.
So he's asking how customizable is that touchscreen display? Can you do Pathfinder style panels or different ways to display the mixer control? There are plans, because this is an HTML5 interface, that we will offer some customizing features of that master module. At the moment, anything that you want to do in Pathfinder is available to you to script and set up custom user screens inside of Pathfinder. And inside the master module, those are things that are on the roadmap as the console matures. But right at the moment, we're going to have a main screen, as you see here, and then there is a basic mode that removes some of the additional functionality and some of the additional metering and tries to simplify that display a little bit so it's not quite as busy for a console or for a user that doesn't quite need all the information. So what we should do on that one, Mark, is we'll follow up with you with a couple of screenshots and show you what we have available today, as well as taking your input for what things should look like down the road.
Was there another question, Angie?
Yes, we have several of them. Let's see here. Mark originally asked, are there any more modules coming in the pipeline? For example, more simple modules with less screens and buttons, as has become the standard in European radio.
It's possible there are. At the moment, we've got these two modules, and what we should do is get into the demo screen, and you'll see we have a couple other modules that are going to be software modules. So we'll show you how those work and see if those make a difference to the functionality and the workflow that you're looking for. Before we get there, we'll jump into the engine real quick. The Quasar engine is a 1RU server-based engine. This is designed to go into your rack room or technical operations center. It does have a fan in it, along with dual power supplies and dual network functionality, but you will mount it away from the studio, and it's where all the magic happens inside of the Quasar, but it's not required to be underneath the console, just needs to be able to access the same live wire network that your Quasar console is sitting on.
And if I could add, I think you said dual power supplies. It actually has a number of fans in it, and depending on which fan that is, you can lose a fan and still go on the air, still be on the air. It'll work fine, and it'll notify you on the front panel that that there's a fan that has failed. So this is one of the things that impresses me about this kind of hardware, that it's so robust that things can fail, and it can absolutely still keep running. We've used this platform, this server platform, in some other products, and have just been so overwhelmed with just how robust it is, that it's been very useful for us as a company.
It's an excellent platform, and we plan to continue to use it with lots of success. The Quasar engine has 64 stereo channels available to it. So when you think about this, because we have this new matrix of faders plus layers plus channels, the mental math and the mental gymnastics requires a little bit of a hurdle to get over. So just realize that you can control 64 different things and mix them simultaneously. Those can be on physical channels, virtual channels, or layered channels. So you have lots of different ways of configuring things to meet, again, your needs and your workflow. And all of those channels have full DSP processing, which we'll go through on the live side of things. But we've redone all the processing inside of the Quasar, and it's available on every channel regardless of the type of audio source that you have coming in. And one more thing we have is an auto mix on every channel. So that's available as well to be able to, again, clean up your mixing and take some of the burden off of your operators whenever that's appropriate.
The 16 additional V mixers, wow, this is so helpful for people who are familiar with Axia gear. Their consoles have always had some amount of virtual mixers, that is, mixers that are not really accessible from the top, but they may be doing utility service in the background, and they're also remote controllable. This console, the Quasar, has 16 V mixers, and each of them has 5 stereo inputs that are independent from the console. Also, of course, the Quasar features motorized faders, as we've talked about before. The workflows that you get with this kind of thinking that goes into the console, really flexible, automated audio workflows, including, as Cam mentioned, auto mixing and the automatic mix minus, which we've had since day one in Axia consoles. The source and the show profiles are separate, and they can be totally customized. In fact, you can, let's say you have a given source and you want that source to behave one way during one show and behave another way during another show. Well, that is absolutely possible with the Quasar console. No user intervention, just bring in a different show profile and bam, the sources behave as you want them to for that particular show. I've had that happen at a couple of radio stations. They said, "Oh no, we don't want the person on the other end of the codec to hear us unless we push a button." But the afternoon says, "No, I want that person available all the time. I don't even want to push a button. I just want to talk to that person on the other end of the codec." So same source, different behaviors. The customizable color strip. Cam, tell us about that.
So the customized color strip is exactly that. You've got a strip between that on-off button. It's an RGB strip. It's kind of funny when you click on it, you get the little Windows color palette to be able to choose the color of that LCD strip that you'd like it to be based upon the type of fader or the type of source that you have on that fader. So it's really easy to make your operator mics red, your automation systems blue, your remote channels and codec channels green, and so on and so forth. Again, one more way of just providing confidence that the operator is grabbing the right fader for the right source at the right time.
Cam, we've got a couple of pictures of these consoles in use. This picture comes to us from France. This is from TCR Radio in France. And you see they've put their automation, this is a combination of radio and they have television and camera control, as you can see in the same room there. And they've put their automation screens on top of the Quasar console. And then we have another picture here from Notre Dame, I believe. What do you know about this one, Cam?
Notre Dame University using it to run their Notre Dame football as well as hockey broadcasts.
Wow, that looks really nice. Cam, at this point, we're going to stop. I'm going to stop sharing. We'll go back to seeing us for a moment while you get set up to show us deep inside the console.
Yeah, I don't think we want to show us for too long because I mean I'm sporting my my COVID-19 haircut here, which is nothing to look at. So what we're going to do now is we are going to jump into a graphical representation of our console. So this is actually a console emulator that is running. It's not the HTML5 interface. It's an application that we use just for testing and troubleshooting and things like this when we have to give a webinar presentation and we don't actually have a console in front of us. And quite frankly, sometimes consoles are a little bit hard to show when you're trying to hold a camera in one hand and manipulate things and get your big fingers in the others. So what we're looking at here is, again, a quick snapshot of, you're able to see a couple of faders depending upon your screen size here. You'll see a couple of faders here on the left-hand side of the screen. You'll see our master module running on the right-hand side of the screen. And it should be looking very similar to the pictures that you were seeing a few minutes ago on our snapshots of the console that we were displaying. As Kirk mentioned, on the fader module side here, we've got our on-off buttons. These are physical buttons, along with our color-coded display here that shows what's happening, what type of source we have assigned to this fader. Moving from the bottom up, we have a talkback button and a PFL button, PFL or Q, pre-fader listen. We have auto mix available to us. It's great when I click this auto mix button and I start enabling the auto mix. You've seen my bar graph here has changed. And what I have here is on the left side of the bar graph is my pre-fader level. The right side of the bar graph has changed to a gain reduction meter, showing me what's happening on that particular fader's gain with respect to my auto mix being enabled. I've got some user programmable buttons. These are either programmable via Pathfinder or via the drop-down menus inside the Quasar UI that allows you to assign different functionality to these buttons. Maybe I want an AFL button, or I want a quick way to assign or unassign equalizer settings to a fader. I can use any of those settings for these 4 user programmable buttons. Here's a nice logo, one of my favorites, that gets to go on the fader strip as opposed to having text. If I were to rest my finger on this button up here, that's an example of a touch-sensitive button. I'm just resting my finger on the encoder, and instead of seeing my Apple logo, now I see the source name as well as some attributes as to what's going on with that particular source. I've got an input meter on the left-hand side, and on the right-hand side, if this source had a backfeed, I would see the backfeed meter. If you can just see on your screen here on this side, there's a ZIP1 codec on the fader right next to me. That has got an input meter on the input source meter on the left, and on the right side, you do see my backfeed meter that I'm actually feeding back to my codec. If I were to click the talkback button, we would see this meter drop down, being replaced by my voice, going down to the talkback side of that meter. So pretty good, pretty exciting, and very easy to use and very thoughtfully laid out without a lot of clutter, but with quite a lot of power. We'll jump over to the master module. That's where really all the magic happens. We'll take a quick tour of the physical controls before we get into the master's touchscreen and what's going on that touchscreen. So down here at the bottom of the module, I've got my control room headphone and my control room speaker controls. I've got 6 different things that I can choose from by pressing these are actual, again, real buttons, not a touch screen, along with my level control for the headphones. I can link the headphones and the speakers so that I'm always listening to the same source on both, or I can unlink them. And then I have a button here labeled monitor options. And when I hit that, it actually goes and changes the master touchscreen, and now I have a lot more options available. So these are things that you might not listen to very often, but you want to get to every once in a while. Maybe you want to monitor an auxiliary bus or a different external feed or the phone bus. You can monitor all of those just by hitting the buttons up here on the touchscreen, and then unclicking the monitor option button takes you back to the home screen. So a very easy way to get into additional controls that maybe aren't accessed as often, but are still sometimes quite necessary and quite critical. As we look at the controls down the right-hand side, our top button is a show profile button. When I hit that, I'm taken to, guess what? Where I can choose show profiles. Inside the show profile, what that is it's a complete snapshot of the console. So for your different users or your different programs or different day parts, you'll program the console up to behave and to have the right sources and the right backfeeds and the right equalizer settings, all customized for whatever show or whatever user is about to be on air. By choosing that profile, if it's time for the morning show, I can choose that profile, I can load that show, and it remaps the console completely for the morning show as I may need to have it. Or I can go for an afternoon show and I can load the show and I get a profile for the afternoon show at the same time. So it works very, very nicely to be able to quickly go through and pick the type of show or what the preset is that you have for any particular user or any particular day part. When I rest my mouse, or my finger in this case, my virtual finger, on any of these 8 buttons here, you see a pop-up screen that actually comes up on the touch screen as to what's going to happen on any of these buttons. So if I were controlling codecs or firing automation systems or triggering GPIOs, I would see all of those functions written out in clear text. So again, there was no confusion as to what was going to happen on that screen. You can have a lot more functionality than just the few characters you were limited to on an LCD button. And those are dynamic. So if it's a toggle type of button, or I press once to connect a codec and I press again to disconnect the codec, you'll see that functionality follow as I as I engage those buttons and the actions happen, the text that's displayed will dynamically change as well. The next 4 buttons are my layer buttons. So as I click those layer buttons, I'll change between the 4 layers of the console. If this is again an operation that you've chosen not to have layers, then it's pretty easy to deactivate those layers, and this just becomes 4 more user buttons that are available for you. The home button takes me back to my home screen. So if you've ever jumped up into my different screen here, then you'll quickly go back to the home screen. The record button is an interesting feature that has not really gotten as much press over the life of Axia that we would have thought. It's available in Fusion, it's available in Element, it's also available in IQ, but the record mode is a special button that quickly takes you into an offline recording state. And then when you hit the button again, it takes you back into your on-air program. So it allows your host to very easily go and do phone bits or voice tracking without the danger of them forgetting to take their mic out of program and accidentally broadcasting their voice track on the air when they forgot to click a button or do something. So
Cam, without the record button, a user would have to perhaps deassign their mic channel from program 1 and put other things into different buses, then change their headphone monitor, then record their voice track all the while the console is still maintaining whatever's on the air. And then when they get done with that, then they have to go reassign all the stuff back to the way it was. The record button makes all that happen automatically.
Exactly. It's just a very quick switching between 2 presets. Say it's a recording preset and an on-air preset.
Cool.
And the talk button here allows you to talk back through the gooseneck mic or whatever mic you've designated as your talkback microphone to a studio on the other side. These 5 encoders down here are encoders that will control various aspects of the touchscreen. So as you go into it, you have the option of either controlling things by touching the touchscreen, or for some people, they would rather grab a knob. And so for people that want to grab a knob, you've got knobs down here, and you see these little lines that will correspond to various controls on the touchscreen, so that rather than touching the screen, you can grab a knob and have that, adjust the parameters as you need. Now, this wouldn't be a live webinar without getting an error no connection to engine message. So those of you that are paying attention at home might have realized that something in my demo system here is no longer talking to the Quasar engine that is across the room from me. So we'll see how far we get before we have to potentially close this window and reopen it again and see what's happening. What we're going to do is go across these tabs here at the top of the screen. What these are the various screens that we have available to get into those things that we talked about as advanced controls. So these are things that you don't necessarily need to use all the time. So we don't need dedicated buttons or lots of real estate taking up those spaces on the console, but it's things you need to get to from time to time, like show profiles. So when I click on the Show Profile button, it's actually the same as clicking up on the Show Profile physical button, but I can get to it from this menu as well, and you can pick the show profile you want, and you can load it right from this screen. You can also capture a show profile by hitting this Capture Show button. And so once you have the console set up how you like it, and the operator has everything just the way they want, clicking on that Capture Show button allows you to name the show. This is going to be our webinar. And we say OK, and it's now added to the list of shows that are available to choose from. Our monitor options, again, we talked about that already down here. That's this monitor options that lets you pick additional things to monitor through your headphones, through your speakers, or through the studio monitors. Auto mix is a great functionality that I think, again, doesn't get as much use and as much press as it deserves. Auto mix is a great way to help your talent pay attention to the gain and pay attention to the levels of their console without having them to worry about everything all the time. So with the way auto mix works is you have your channel selectors here, and you can set the weight of the auto mix. And when we say weight, what you're doing is you're setting a priority. of how important is this audio channel versus the other audio channels you have on the console. So a great way to talk about this would be for a sports broadcast. You would have your main announcers be the highest priority. You would have the people that were roaming around the stands interviewing folks be a lower priority. And maybe you would have the field and the ambient noise be the lowest priority. That way, when something exciting happened on the field, the roar of the crowd wouldn't drown out your announcers because they have the higher priority, and the console would reduce the gain of those lower priority sources so that your gain levels stay exactly where you want them to be. I often talk about this as like spell check for audio. So it's not something that you want to rely on necessarily to do all your mixing, but it's a great way to help bolster the impact of your show and have a really nice sound without operators having to pay attention to every single thing. Auto mix is enabled on each fader with a dedicated auto mix button. So I have these buttons down here, and when I click those auto mix buttons, it will either add something to that auto mix bus or take them off of the auto mix bus. And then you can use this screen here to control the weight and the priority dynamically of each of those auto mix sources. Quasar gives you a built-in call controller as well. So when we were talking about optional modules that might be available, one of the constraints and one of the difficulties is when you make a hardware module, it can only do so many things. And this is one of the challenges that we ran into with Fusion. Many of you might not know that Fusion includes auto mix, but there's no button for auto mix. So it becomes difficult from a user perspective to enable and disable auto mix and to have the dynamic functionality that you might want. In fact, the IQ consoles also have auto mix now, and it suffers from the same problem. You just don't have enough control, physical controls, to be able to really use auto mix in the way that makes it sound good. So the feature is there, but the usability is not ideal. And so by having a touch screen in the console, it allows us to design new modules and new functionality and new features without being constrained by either too many buttons or a button that we need that's just not quite there yet. So in this case, we've got a 8-line call controller, so we can take control of a VX, control of an HX6, and build that right into the console. Used to be an optional module under Fusion and Quasar and IQ that you would have to pay for. Now it's just a software module that comes with Quasar that allows you to do that straight from the touchscreen. We have 8 auxiliary bus outputs. These again can all be pre-fader, post-fader, pre-switch, post-switch. We can set those up however you like it, along with 2 auxiliary returns. And a neat feature that we added in here is another use for this touchscreen is a set of hotkeys. So what we've noticed is there's too many screens inside of a broadcast facility, and there's too many screens that only do one thing inside of a broadcast facility. That was one of the criticisms that we got from Fusion, is that it had a screen and it only ever did one thing. So many automation system users like to have a screen full of hotkeys that let them fire sound effects and launch bits and start events. This gives you a way of firing that automation system. So we brought the hotkey screen onto the Quasar screen, which potentially allows you to get rid of some of that screen real estate and that wall of monitors that's blocking your sight lines. We can get rid of those and have 30 buttons here that by pressing a button, what it does is it sends a command to your automation system, and guess what? Fires that audio bit for you right out of the Quasar touchscreen.
Wow, I can see morning shows staying on that screen quite a bit. I want to point out something. You've been touching these things with a mouse because you are actually using an application that emulates the Quasar console itself. That's the best way we could show this to you on a webinar. I have sat in front of a Quasar and used these buttons, and maybe on your computer screen at home, this looks a bit small for touching, but I can tell you that in person, that touchscreen is 12 inches tall, and the buttons are exactly right sized. So, you know, they're not too big, they're not too small. They are just like the middle bear. They are just right. And even the buttons across the top there that are orange that you go to select those different functions that Cam just took you through, they're the right size too, to just touch quickly and accurately and get right to. Cam, it looks like you're showing something pretty cool here with dynamics.
Well, we are now jumping into, this is the touch screen when you are changing things that don't necessarily apply to the whole console,
Hmm.
but they apply to an individual fader. So you're going to see here, I'm looking at my channel number 4 fader, which has the Beatles on it. And this just gives us the home view of that fader strip. So I can see right now that I'm in all 4 program buses because these happen to be lit up. I don't have any filters or dynamics active, but I do have my EQ active. The de-esser is not turned on. The auto mix is not enabled for that channel.
Hmm.
Here's the EQ curve that I have set up for that. Here's the dynamics that are straight because nothing's going on there. Don't have anything happening in the auto mix side of things, and don't have anything on my input meters on this side over here. So it's just a nice snapshot of what's happening on a global view for any particular input channel on your console.
Nice. I love the graphical look of the both the EQ and the dynamics, the compressor. That gives you a great visual as to what's going on audibly and good feedback both ways.
Well, that's really something special, and that's something that you're going to have to hear to believe. But these dynamics and EQs in here are just fantastic. So as we go through the tabs across the top here, we've got time for a quick flyover. So consider this the appetizer course. And what we invite you to do is to contact us and your sales rep to get a more in-depth demo and a deeper dive onto each of these functions, because in our webinar time here, we really don't have enough time to go into depth to tell you a whole lot about it. So this is getting your palate wet for more. The source tab here allows you to select from all the different sources that are on your Livewire network. So you can quickly go through and see the different sources you have available, select a source. You can even preview a source before you assign it to a fader, and load and unload any sources that you have. You can also sort them by different types of sources. So if I just want to see the microphones, I can quickly filter my list. So if you have a large Livewire network, you're maybe not having to take up screens and screens and lots of scrolling to get where you want to go. You can just filter and get there very, very quickly. We have a much improved input section. So we're able to do some things that we couldn't do with our previous consoles that were big requests before, where we were able to control our input gain and our microphone preamp gain on channels. We've got an input trim level. We have got some filters that we can set up for a high pass and a low pass filter, along with a phase control and output metering on the right-hand side here. The dynamic screen gives us a very, very comprehensive compressor, limiter, expander, and noise gate. This really sounds amazing, and you could really make your talent and your audio sound really crisp and clear, because again, this is available for every type of channel, not just mic channels. It's for any type of line channel, telephone channel, codec channel. You can really, really make these things sound great and have really consistent and nice sounding audio throughout your entire program chain. We have a full 4-band parametric equalizer. It's fully parametric. You've got adjustable Q, and those frequency bands can go across the entire frequency band. You are not limited to any type of fixed crossover points or any type of band separations. You can move any of these points anywhere across there and really get the sculpt and the sound that you want. Again, not just for mics, but for any type of audio that you need to sweeten. On the mic side, though, we've got a world-class de-esser. And my favorite thing about this de-esser is it's an old school style of de-esser where you're going to control it by ear. And by that, you've got these 4 patch points down here at the bottom that allow you to listen to how the de-esser is working in real time. And so what we do is we extract the S out of the signal, we process the S, and we put the S back in. And we can listen to all of those patch points, the process signal, just the S, the signal without the S, or the whole thing together as a fully put together sound. So you can really dial in the right sound for your operators and really make it sound sweet. Aux sends aren't so exciting. They just happen to be more of the aux send side. And then we have the ability to control sources. This is, again, an HTML5 view. We can control sources from this screen. So what that allows us to do is, it's not so exciting when you think about it from the Quasar master module, But when you think about the fact, as we said at the beginning, that that screen you can replicate in other locations, now all of a sudden you have control of all the parameters of your console, all the parameters of your faders from any screen. So I can control fader levels, auto mix enabling, program bus, channel on off for any of my faders. And that can be done on a local basis where you might have a producer sitting back behind a board operator needing to change something, or in a different room or a different building, or even if you're working from home, being able to control your console. And that takes us all the way back to our home screen here, where I see that we're coming right up at 3 o'clock on the top of the hour. And I think our meter is going to run out on the webinar, but our idea was to give everybody a taste of some of the power that's behind this and give you the idea of the questions to ask and the things that you'll want to dig into more. What we have is a team of people that are standing by to answer your questions, to do a more in-depth demo. And again, our sales team is going to be happy to meet with you on an individual or small group basis and be able to take you through a much more comprehensive look at this and really dig into any of the particulars that you had on either configuring a system that you might want to buy or demo, or understanding how it's going to work better in your facility. Kirk?
Cam, if you'll stop showing your screen, I will share mine for just a couple of final points. And as you said, we're unfortunately getting close to being out of time. So I think we're capturing all the questions. I see some good questions in there. They're all good, but some that we'll be answering. I want to show you a picture that this console has received an award from Radio World at IBC 2019. The guy that you see there is Luca La Rosa. And it's been Luca's dream, because this guy's a great broadcast engineer and a great designer of broadcast equipment. And Luca has been lead on designing a lot of things about the Quasar. I met Luca, my goodness, probably 12, 13 years ago in Italy, where he lives. And he said, I want to design a console with you. And it took a while to get us all together. And Luca has now been designing this console with a great deal of background and a huge amount of feedback on our other consoles. So I wanted you to meet Luca La Rosa, just very passionate about console design. And finally, we have an email address for you. Now, those of you who have asked questions in the Q&A, we've got your name, we've got your question. Hope we have your information, but if you think maybe we don't, you ought to send us your same question. Just copy and paste it into an email to us, quasar@telosalliance.com. Cam, any last words before we turn it back over to Angie?
No, I appreciate everybody coming. I hope you guys have gotten excited about what we have to offer. And I can just say that, the webinar doesn't do it justice. I can't wait until you guys get to be able to see the console and we get to show it to you in person. So with any luck, we'll be on the road here in the coming months, and we'll be able to visit you and really give you a taste of all this console can do for you in your facility. Angie.
Yes. So speaking of Luca, for everybody that has been asking questions, I've been doing my best to get you answers in the background, and Luca has been the person who's been supplying those answers for me. So
awesome.
yes, he has been helping. I do see that we have like 8 or 9 still open. So apologies for those that I wasn't able to get to, but we will get to those and shoot you a note with answers on those that we weren't able to get to. So Luca, I know that you don't have a mic or video open, but thank you for your help. Thank you everybody for attending. Like Kirk said, we have that email address. Please reach out to us with any questions. And a reminder that after this webinar, we will do 2 things. We'll send you a survey, 3 simple questions. Please take 30 seconds to answer those so that we can better serve you in the future. And we'll also, within the next 24 hours, send you out an email with a link to this video recording so that you can watch it, rewatch it, share it, and we'll also send it to the people that registered to attend but didn't attend. So you should be getting 2 emails from us within the next 24, 48 hours. So thank you, everybody. I hope everybody's doing well and that you enjoyed this webinar, and have a great rest of your day and week.
Thank you, Angie. Bye-bye, everybody.
Thanks, you. Bye-bye.